Hey everyone, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through the camera relocation from the tailgate out here to the adventure carrier on this 2022 Nissan Frontier. Now just a quick disclaimer as you're getting started with this install and relocation, you want to make sure to have the battery disconnected up under the hood, or at the very least just make sure the truck remains off during this process so that the wires you're working with and tying into are not under power at any time. Now if you're watching this video, you likely already have your rear bumper installed as well as your adventure carrier, and you're trying to relocate this camera out to that carrier. If you don't have those installed at this time, you're kind of looking to do everything at the same time, we totally understand. Go ahead and check out those installation videos on the individual product pages where you would have purchased those accessories. Then once you're ready to dive into the camera relocation, you can come back to this video and get started. So the camera you're looking to relocate is right here in the kind of tailgate handle or tailgate release, if you will. To get to that, we're gonna have to first drop the tailgate and remove a couple access panels there. So with the tailgate down, we first need to remove this plastic cover. That's just held in place with 12 fasteners, and to remove those you need a Phillips head driver or Phillips screwdriver, whatever you have available to you there. With all your fasteners removed, this cover comes off pretty easily. It can just be set off to the side for now. Now there's a chance other option packages don't have that plastic cover, but we can only show you the truck we're working on here. So some of you, if you don't have that, you're likely just going to have 8 fasteners in this kind of upper location of the tailgate to remove this metal cover that you see here. But in our case, if your truck is just like ours, just go ahead and grab that out of the way now. Now down inside of here, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the clips holding this camera wire to the tailgate. For that, if you can get one in here, you can use a panel pry tool or a clip tool. A flat screwdriver should work as well. You're just going to get underneath this and kind of pry up. You may have to help by gently pulling to manipulate the wire as well. You can then come over here and remove that camera wire harness connection. That's on a similar style clip here to the metal portion of the tailgate. And that kind of allows you some freedom to manipulate this and get it disconnected. To get this disconnected, you're just going to be pressing down on this small tab kind of in the center here. What works pretty well is just taking your flat screwdriver, make sure your fingers are not behind it where you could hurt yourself there, and pressing straight in. And with that all the way down, you can kind of twist the screwdriver and start to separate this plug. Then just come back in with your hand and pull that apart. With this wire now freed up, you can take a 10mm socket and remove these 2 screws, kind of holding that center plastic portion in. Be sure not to drop these down in the gate. And from there, you should be able to just pull this entire plastic and camera assembly up out of your tailgate. From here, you want to do something to indicate the top of this camera so that you can install it correctly later on out on your adventure carrier. Here I just have a colored Sharpie. I'm just going to make a small mark on the top that can be wiped off later on. You'll then want to find a #1 Phillips screwdriver to remove the 4 screws here on the back. 2 of these that you can see here are going to allow you to unplug this, and then the other 2 are going to allow you to remove this camera from the mounting bracket. With those 2 screws out of the way, just gently pull back to release that connector, and then remove the remaining 2 screws. Then with those 2 out of the way, you can separate the camera from its mounting bracket, and at this time, pay close attention to your screws, as for one, you'll need them to reinstall this later on, but the 2 longer screws are for these outer mounting holes. The shorter screws are for the plug location. At this point, primarily so you don't lose any of this, just in case you ever decide to go back to stock, you can go ahead and reinstall this stuff back into the tailgate. Now before we button the tailgate back up, you're going to want to remove this end of that camera wire harness plug so that it can be reused out on your carrier. For that, just go ahead and cut the tape here. You then just want to make sure that you're cutting far enough back into this harness that you can wire this into your wire extension later on out on your adventure carrier. So normally these Y off kind of right about here. I did dig back into our harness just a little further than you'll really need to, just to show you kind of the importance of making sure you're not cutting into this white and gray wire that runs over here to kind of the lock assembly, and then that you can dig in here a little bit further if you want to get yourself some extra wiring when cutting these off. From here, you can clip off this portion of the harness with your wire cutters, just being cautious and making sure that you don't cut the white and gray wire in here that goes out to that electronic lock and latch assembly. Cutting that leaves you with a pigtail similar to what you see here that can be wired in later on out on your adventure carrier. With that harness connection cut away from here, you'll want to just come back and make sure you get everything back into the factory loom and then tidy that up by taping it up with some new electrical tape. Then we'll move up here where the tailgate harness ties into the body of the vehicle. You're going to have one kind of pull tab, if you will, here that allows you to free this harness connection up from the bed and give you access to this plug. You can additionally remove the 1 and even 2 clips back here holding this harness into the tailgate just for some extra slack while we're working with this in here. Along those same lines, you can undo the clip here holding this plug into the bottom of this plastic retainer. Moving underneath the truck here, just to gain some extra slack, we are going to remove this connection just behind that window where you just undid that wire harness connection up above. There's just 2 clips here holding this in. You can kind of pinch those in with a pair of pliers while lifting up on this connection, and that should free this up from the body there. And that will give us some extra slack to push up through the top just to be able to work with this wire harness. You could additionally kind of pull this down in and do this below here if for whatever reason you find that easier for you, but really primarily for filming it's easier for us from up above, so that's how you'll see us do this. Now back up top here, we can then unplug this harness connection. This just has a small thumb tab here, so you can press down on that and pull these 2 apart. Just set this end off to the side for now. From here, kind of similar to before, we're going to dissect this harness a little bit to gain access to the wires that you need to cut and splice into down here. So very carefully with a razor blade, I kind of felt around gap in the loom here, and we're just going to lightly score this, kind of using extreme caution so that you don't cut into any of the wires in this harness. And then you can slowly peel this back to gain access to the wires. Go ahead and free it up out here. Now you want to get pretty far back into this, all the way back where you're essentially completely removing the T or Y section here going out to this second connector, at least for now. That kind of helps you identify which wires you're actually splicing into, and the 2, this white and gray one over here, that we're going to kind of leave alone. So go ahead and peel the rest of this tape as well. So you do kind of want to be extra cautious when you get to this step, as these 2 wires running out to this second connector are white and gray, and there is a white and gray wire in here that you are going to be cutting. So you want to be absolutely positive that you're cutting the correct wires and not causing yourself any problems there. These 2 are ever so slightly smaller than the wires over here, but these are also 4 wires running into the same main harness over here. So it's pretty obvious if you get this torn apart to this point which ones you're kind of digging into here. Our kit does provide you with 4 of the same color wires that you're going to see in this harness, so that makes it pretty easy to kind of choose the wires you're tying into here, as well as get them connected out on your carrier. To tie those in, you're going to be using the provided butt splice connectors you see here. To do it this way, we are essentially going to be snipping each of these wires, kind of stripping back the sheathing. We'll reinstall one end into this end of the butt connector, for example, and then the other end as well as your new wire into the second side, and kind of crimp those in together, creating somewhat of a Y. There are obviously other ways that you can tie in if you're kind of experienced with electrical and have some more tools and kind of connectors, if you will, available to you there. So if you have that skill set, go ahead and do it the way you wish, but we're kind of working to achieve the same goal there. We're gonna work through one of these together, kind of showing you that process, and then go ahead and get the remaining 3 done. So I'm just gonna snip. I'm kind of choosing to do the center of the wire here. That will leave 4 of these all kind of in one somewhat large bundle here, but this all gets tucked underneath the truck, so it's not a visual thing there. Then we'll go ahead and strip back the sheathing from each end of this. Then, as I mentioned, we'll grab one of those butt splice connectors, slide the wire in and crimp that in place. As always, kind of check your connections here with just a somewhat gentle pull on that. Then taking the gray wire in this case, since that's where we're working at on the harness here, we will twist that in with that factory harness. Get this twisted up nice and tight. And then you can trim back a little if needed so that this isn't too long going into your connector. You can then take that pair of wires, insert them into your connector and crimp them in place. Again, always check that connection. You can see we already did that here with the remaining 3 wires, but that process is the same, so go ahead and complete that now. And again, with these being heat shrink connectors, you can then take your heat gun and shrink all these, sealing them up. So once you have all 4 of those wired in, it should look something like what you see here. We do provide you with a new split loom to go over top of all of this. However, at this point, I'm just going to electrical tape kind of the first stretch of it right here, as well as the first couple inches out here, and then I'll add that split loom in once we push all the wires through under the truck. With this new harness leg tied in, it should wind up looking something like this, and you can begin to feed this wiring down through this hole and underneath the bed of the truck. We can then reconnect our plug in here, get that snapped back into this retainer, and then push everything here back through and click this back into the bed. For this next step, you will have to get back down under the truck for just a couple minutes. This is when you'll want to find the split loom provided in your kit and get it installed onto your new wiring tied in down here. Go ahead and work those wires down into your loom. Once you have the wire down in the loom, just be sure to come back and now tape that loom to your wiring up here just to kind of secure it in place. Just to keep things tidy, we now taped up the ends of our 4 wires here so that it's easier to push them through to this passenger side rear corner of the bumper. You can either go over top of this mount and kind of up above the frame rail, or through the cutout window in the bumper here. Go ahead and feed all your slack through this location. Then out in the corner, you'll feed this wiring through this kind of radius corner section here, and we'll jump back up top in just a second to kind of clarify where that is for you. Now here is that location from up top, so you're just below the tailgate. Again, you got that kind of radius cut out there and just inside of this spindle, and you can then start routing this wire over to the adventure carrier. Now feeding this up the carrier, you're trying to get out to the tire mount up here. The easiest way to do that is to go through the cutout behind here and then right up along this side and zip tie to the provided holes through here. Once you get to this point, it's a good idea to just pull your drop pin out here and very carefully swing your carrier all the way back open, basically to where the carrier would contact the bumper. Make sure you're being extremely cautious if you already have your tire mounted up here at this time, but this will cover you, making sure you have enough slack here in the event that this does ever overswing. Then you can take the wire up top and feed it through one of these remaining holes. Where you go here is going to vary just a little bit depending on where you chose to mount your tire up here on your carrier, but I'm just going to go through this vertical slot out here for now. And then I'll come back through with some cable ties or zip ties and tie this in. Once you have things tied in throughout here, we can swing this closed and get our tire mounted on the outside. You'll next want to find your license plate mounting bracket and get this installed to the tire mount here before your spare wheel goes in place. So a couple things here. One word of caution is this is a part that's constantly changing for us as we add different bolt patterns for different vehicles. So don't be alarmed if yours looks slightly different than the one you see here. The general premise is making sure the way it gets installed is correct so that you have good engagement of the wheel over top of this bracket around every one of these wheel studs. So this would be correct on this one, for example. You can still slide it over the studs in this manner, but it leaves you without any real contact around this bottom stud or anything centering the bracket, so that would be incorrect. Now, since this is likely the first time you're closing your carrier with your wiring in place, just take a quick look at it down behind here and make sure that it's not binding with anything and that you don't need to make any minor adjustments there. After that, you can go ahead and just tuck your extra slack kind of up and out of the way so that we can get our spare tire mounted in place here on the carrier. Now, if you're installing this solo, like you're seeing me do it here, this bracket is going to want to kind of flop around a little bit. So just a little tip, you can take a piece of tape and kind of hold the top of this up so that it remains centered as you're sliding the wheel in place. So just make sure this bracket stays nice and centered on the wheel as you're getting things installed, and you can then install the 3 lug nuts and tighten this up. So for that step, we provide you with these open-end hex lug nuts. We do understand that some of you are going to want to buy an aftermarket lug nut that's going to match the other lug nuts on your 4 aftermarket wheels out on the rest of the truck. So if you're doing that, you need to order a 1/2-20 lug nut for these 3 locations. If you're using our lug nuts, you'll just need a 13/16 socket to go in here and tighten them up. So just figure out what works best for you and get your lug nuts installed. With that tight, you can then find this mounting bracket. This is going to be kind of the main bracket that we bolt our license plate and camera mount to moving forward. So this will just slide in to the bottom side here, and you'll drop this 3/8 carriage bolt down through the top in the square hole cut out there, and then install the split washer and wing nut from the bottom. You can leave this just a little bit loose for now so that you have that slotted adjustment available to you, and then once you get everything tidied up, come back in and tighten this last thing. Now, how you assemble things moving forward from here is really going to depend on what end result you're looking for. Specifically, what I'm referring to is whether or not you're just relocating the camera to this bracket or whether you're also relocating your license plate at this time. If you're relocating the license plate, it does require you to run 2 additional wires up to here for a license plate light that will mount to the bottom surface of this license plate bracket. If you're doing all of that, you're going to take these 3 brackets in this order and assemble them using 1/4-20 button head hardware bolted to your main mount here on the spare. Assembled correctly, it should look something like this. You would then at this time already have your camera mounted to this bracket or this mounting face right here. So at this time, if you're moving forward from here with your license plate and camera mount, you would already want to have the camera installed to this kind of center camera mounting bracket, which we'll go over in just a minute with everything loose on our cart. And again, since we're not installing it on here, I'll be removing this license plate mounting bracket moving forward. Now, I did just tell you that this needs to go on this kind of outside of the bracket. It only has to go in this location if you're running the license plate mount to kind of have clearance for the light tab. If you're just running it to relocate the camera like so, you can tuck it in behind here, which just kind of cleans it up a little bit as it removes that part number cut out. For those of you relocating your plate to the adventure carrier, this is likely going to be your easiest spot to tie in and get power and ground for the license plate light up there. This is the factory license plate light harness and kind of the back side of it here where it snaps into your bumper. Now, to cover our bases and show those of you installing and relocating your license plate to this location, we also provide you an LED light to tie into your license plate light circuit. This is just adhesive backed, so you can peel that off the back, line it up carefully on this tab, just kind of center it up, and press it into place here. And then these will be the 2 wires that you'll tie in to that license plate light circuit. And we do provide you 2 wires as well that you can use for this in your hardware kit. So for our purposes here, I'll remove this now and we'll show you how to get the camera installed into this bracket out on a bench. So now you're going to need to find the specific bracket for your Frontier. It's going to be this number 7 bracket with a pattern like you see here. You also want the backer bracket and the main camera wire harness as well as the camera. So starting out with the wire harness, we're just going to tidy this up a little bit so it looks cleaner when it's on the back of the truck. So I'll start by removing the electrical tape that they have on here from the factory and getting this foam out of the way. That foam is backed with adhesive, so you may have to work at it just a little bit to get it all removed, but we're then just going to kind of tape up this end. Pretty much all we're doing here is tidying this up from an appearance standpoint so that it's all black and a little bit more subtle when it's mounted up on the back of our vehicle. We're also no longer using the factory clips on here, so those can be removed. I'm just going to very carefully with some wire cuts, making sure not to cut into the sheathing of this wire, remove the zip tie portion of this clip. You should then be able to peel it back and that harness should pop free. And then for this one, you're going to want some sort of either small flat screwdriver or pick like I have here. You're going to need to slide that down into the small window on the back of this clip and pry up and then push toward the harness, and that should let you free this up. From here, grab your camera. You're going to be mounting it to this face of the bracket. Make sure you get that to slide down in to those notches and line up nice and easy. And then if you'll remember correctly, you're now looking for the 2 longer screws to thread into the camera mounting holes out on the sides. And if you were following along earlier, we made our mark to reference the top of the camera, so make sure you're paying attention to that as well, and then tighten these up with your Phillips screwdriver. Since this large connector end is not going to fit through this bracket, you now need to feed the small end through the back side of this and into the camera here. Make sure you're paying attention to this because it does have a very small kind of locating notch and tab on this connection, and you can then install those 2 final small Phillips screws. With this properly assembled, you should then be able to kind of slide these 2 together, and we can then reinstall this assembly up on our spare tire and camera mount. Now from here, we're going to pull our wires through that we routed all the way through from the tailgate earlier on. How you do this is really up to you. There is a small hole in the center of the wheel now at this time that you can feed those through, as this smaller factory connector end will fit through that location. Just to keep things visible for our video purposes, I am just going to kind of pull those up through one of the larger spoke openings in this wheel. And that'll kind of give us the best access to show you what's going on here, but you may or may not be able to do this depending on the specific wheels that you have. At this point, you need to decide how much of this slack you're going to cut away and how much you're going to leave here on the vehicle. So that's entirely up to you. Just make sure you leave yourself enough that you can manipulate this, maneuver it around, get it wired in and plugged in behind here with relative ease. You do have kind of all this space behind the wheel to work with, so feel free to leave some extra and just tuck it in there after the fact. Now I did cut the wires, but I left the loom long so that we can kind of cut that to length after we have the factory harness connection, or plug if you will, back in place. That way we can kind of bring it up to here or so and then tape that last inch or so. At this point, you basically have 4 wires that need connected from the truck to the plug, but if you'll remember, 2 of these are black, where you have a black, white, red, and gray over here. So to decipher which ones go where, specifically this gray wire is going to be connected to pin number 1 on this harness connector. So as you view it here up close, pin number 1 is this top location, and if I take that wire in hand and flip this around, you can kind of see by tracing it back where pin location 1 is from this angle. So kind of viewing it up close here, pin location 1 is this top corner, and if I take that black wire and hold it in hand, we spin things around, you can see pin 1 from this angle or this view as well. So to keep things easy, I'm just going to stick with that wire. We're going to crimp it into our butt connector and then crimp this into the gray wire on the truck so that the remaining wires are all just kind of color coded along the way. Now you already saw us basically do this same thing earlier on up toward the tailgate of the truck using these same heat shrink style butt connectors. So we're not going to walk back through that same process over and over again, but basically crimp all of these in place and heat shrink them so they're sealed up nicely. With that done, it should look something like this. Now, yes, you could stagger these, maybe 2 and 2 if you wanted to take the time to do that and make this a little bit more low profile, but again, it's all gonna be hidden behind here, and we have a big enough loom that these should all tuck down inside of, nice and easily. So we'll do that. We'll bring it up to right about here, and then just roughly marking this with my thumb, this is where we'll cut our loom. And with the wires tucked down in there, we can now finish things up by taping all of this up. I'm then going to feed this back into the wheel and up through that center hole location. And then out here, plug these two together. And we can then go throw the truck in reverse and check to see if our camera is working. Once you know this is working, you'll grab a 5/32 hex to tighten these two button heads. And then tighten up that 3/8 wing nut on your carriage bolt down here. And then not required, but I did grab an extra zip tie to just hold the wire down to our mounting bracket here, primarily for appearance. And we'll then cut this off. Now, if everything is working properly out here at this time and you haven't done so already, you can go back in and reinstall those two panels to your tailgate and kind of finish up your install. So as you guys can see here, none of that is too difficult, just a little bit tedious. So just follow along and get this installed properly. And if you have any questions at all, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.